Good Saturday evening. Happy Saturday to everybody. You know, I have this little bit of self-confidence or insecurity that makes me have to say this. I hope you don't all think I just wear the same thing every day, like never change my clothes or anything. I've had this sweatshirt on almost 2/3 of the broadcasts you've seen. I just want you to know I've got about a dozen of these identical sweatshirts. This is brand spanking new clean, and I just put it on after a long day. It's soft, it's warm, it's very nice, almost fresh out of the dryer. This was the shirt that we put together for the Paradigm Symposium, as you can see here. That's a little event that I ran for 5 years off of my Intrepid magazine effort. I would publish that magazine, started back in 2011, and ran for a few years. And during that time, we started a symposium. And by we, I mean me. It was my friend Micah Hanks who actually founded the thing with me. And we ran it that first year in 2012. And at that event, it was really all the people we would have write from the magazine and different people we had encountered in all of our stuff over the years. And we put on a big symposium in Minneapolis. And people would come from literally that first year and second year especially. We had people from all over the world. That first year, we pulled what I thought was a coup in getting the cast of Ancient Aliens, Prometheus Productions that you see on the History Channel. We got that whole cast to come on board. And by whole cast, I don't mean every single talking head they've ever had on the show, but we had Eric Von Daniken, Giorgio Tsoukalos, Philip Coppens, and we had George Norrie was there from Coast to Coast. We had Linda Moulton Howe. We had Ian Punnett, who did used to do the weekend Coast to Coast, and I knew Ian from years back. He did a local radio show here on the big powerhouse talk station in Minneapolis, St. Paul area. And so I got all these people came in, and that first year we had the better part of 700 to 750 people in attendance for the Paradigm Symposium. And this is the t-shirt we did, the t-shirt and the sweatshirt that we did to commemorate that event. And I ended up with about a box of those. And so I've got about a dozen of these things, and I wear them quite often. And so that's where that came from. One of these days, we had thought about doing the Paradigm Symposium again. However, I have also said the day that God sticks his face out of the clouds, turns around, shows me his butt cheeks, uses his hands and mouths the butt cheeks to say, I want you to do another Paradigm Symposium, I will never do it. That will be the only thing that will drag me kicking and screaming back into that. It's not that I didn't love the symposium and enjoy the days of it. It was usually a 3 to 4 day event. The problem was you spent 10 months of your year trying to raise money, trying to get advertisers, sponsors, line everything up, juggle money. It was unbelievable. And after a while, I got just tired of doing it. So there you go. And I'm sorry, efforts that you put that much time and expense and effort into should turn around $1 for you every now and then so you can pay your bills on time. And I just didn't get ahead with the symposium. We generally always made it. And we were never really deep into the red. But most of the times we ended up with enough to go out for a nice meal afterwards and celebrate a little bit and take a week or two off before it all started all over again. So while it was an effort of the heart and I enjoyed it, I don't think I'll ever do it again. But that's why you always see me in these shirts. I got a whole bunch of them. So there you go. Getting my insecurities out of the way for the night. Now, tonight, we're going to pick up with the Secret History of the Reptilians, where we left off last night. And there's very little of the book left. And so there's something I'm going to tell you as I launch into the final chapter, which is called New Age and the New Age and the Serpent. And then we slide very quickly into the conclusion of the book and acknowledgments, or I'm sorry, an afterword at the end. And I have usually referred to this book as either the dog of all the books I've written or the toughest book that I wrote, because it was not really in my bailiwick. These were not things that I talked about normally. The reptilian issue. Then there was a chapter in this that I actually had Micah Hanks helped me write regarding the DNA, the blood types, and all of that. It was about 3,000 words, and that was an addition to a chapter that in the final submission of this book, when I was giving the chapters over to my publisher, I sent an old chapter that didn't have that section in it. And the thing went to press and was well underway long before I realized, when I saw a proof and looked back through it, that, hey, that's missing from the book. And so that was a big part of the book that's not there. And I don't even know where that chapter is to even read it to you tonight. I could maybe have thought ahead of time of looking it up and seeing if I could find it on a disc somewhere. But I don't have that. So if in the course of everything that's going on tonight, I do a quick search and find it, I'll read that to you. Oh, you know what? I think I know where it is. I think it's part of an article I have online at my academia.com site. We might call that up and slip it in here at the end. But for right now, this book ended up being something that started as a sincere effort to look into the reptilian issue from almost that ancient aliens, weird kind of out there aspect or perspective. And the more I went on in writing the book, it turned into more history of the mythos, as well as all the different things around it, and the psychology, as you saw, and the theology. And that was really where I laid my effort, was looking at the reptilian issue from those perspectives. So that's what you've gotten so far. Now that we're going to get close to wrapping it up, you'll see where this all took me. And you're going to have to determine for yourself what you think about these characters. And we'll talk about that a little more as we go on. So, Leslie, it's good to see you in the chat room. Folks, I didn't mention this last night because I didn't see your name, so it was out of sight, out of mind. Leslie stopped by. My wife had a big garage sale over the weekend, and Leslie and her husband, Andy, stopped by yesterday for a surprise visit. And I was wearing one of these sweatshirts, Leslie, if you do remember. And so I got to meet Leslie face to face. Nice to meet you, darling. And I would just want to say hi to everybody. Teresa, nice to see you here. Glad you made it. This rising action in every one of these readings is to let a few minutes pass to make sure everybody who's coming and wants to be here gets a front row seat, so to speak. Michelle, nice to see you. Chris Jones, good to see you. Aloha, brother. And Nigel, nice to see you. And Nigel, I've got to ask, where exactly do you live? I mean, we don't need your street address or anything like that. But I was curious, are you over in, I'm assuming you're in Great Britain. I'm just curious to know where you live. So it's May the 5th over there already, because it's well after midnight. I'm surprised you're with us, Nigel. Being 4 in the morning over there. And let's see, Joyce, good to see you. Name with no name, Spooner. Nice to see you. And let's see, I don't know everybody's names always separate from their handles in here. So my handle, everything I've ever done is always Scotty Roberts. So it's just to let people know that's who I am. So if I know you but don't recognize you by your handle, forgive me. Let's see, Sue's good to see you. Jason, good to see you as well. And I think we can, it's 11 a.m. where Nigel is. You've got to be in, are you in Australia by any chance? Let's see, because I know a couple of other people in Australia, and it's 14 hours difference from here, and it's tomorrow. there. So I know when Amanda B shows up, she's from Australia, and she's always 14 hours different. So China. I didn't know you were in China, Nigel. Nice to see you there. I used to know Chinese greetings, and now I don't anymore. So I won't say any kind of a greeting in Chinese. Audrey, good to have you. Audrey, our Man Friday. Good to have you here. So same time as in West Australia. I suppose when you look at a world map, China's up above Australia. So there you go. All right, folks, let's dig into this. This is the final full chapter, and then we get into conclusionary chapters and stuff like that. But this is chapter 7, the New Age and the Serpent. You knew the New Age had to come into this somewhere, as age-old as the whole reptilian issue is. So let's dig into this. Make no mistake about it. The mythologies of the serpent bloodline, though well established in the past, have never gone away. They've merely morphed into new mythology. We have seen that the serpent is ever present in antiquity, slithering its way down through history, leaving meandering trails in the dust of nearly every ancient culture and religion, even touching the untouchable spirituality of Jesus Christ and the religion founded by his immediate friends and disciples, proliferated throughout the known world of 2,000 years ago by the evangelist Saul of Tarsus, who after his conversion changed his name to Paul, an apostle who never actually was an apostle because he never laid eyes on his master, Jesus Christ, but by a vision he was given alone. So he claims, I must add. And we all know about that. If you listen to Jeffrey Dougherty, really the thing that kind of launched him into what he's doing now was his book on Apostle Paul. You can go see his book, Apostle Paul Antichrist, over on his website. The New Age movement, quite frankly, is nothing new at all, in that it's revisionist philosophy that has adapted the old mythologies to newer thinking. Reminds me of a joke. What do you get when you play New Age music backwards? New Age music. All right, the notion that we're all gods is merely a looping replay of the teachings of the ancients, with the new twist that removes the brother god, sister goddess status from only the castes of royals to the common individual, to everybody. Woven throughout the philosophies when viewed as an amalgam of religious, spiritual, scientific, metaphysical thinking, is a connectivity to the serpent that is the driving force. One has to consider only the prevalent New Age philosophy put forward by a well-known teacher and translator. I gotta get my focus here. Enath Easwaran of the Kundalini, she who is ring-shaped. That unconscious, instinctive, or libidinal force or Shakti that is said to lie coiled at the base of the spine, the sleeping serpent, to see where the connection of the serpent of old is morphed into new meaning, but still maintains its presence. Let's move into this section I've called David Icke. You all are familiar with him to some extent. On a more sinister plane, the serpent takes up abode in the highly conspiratorial worldviews of David Icke, former British football, that's soccer for you Yanks, like me, star and news sportscaster turned New Age philosopher who exposes the dream world we believe to be real. That's a quote from his website. The dream world we believe to be real. So says the header on his website. According to the description on his Amazon.com author profile, now I took this from when I wrote this book 6 years ago, so it may have changed since then. But David Von Icke, born April 29th, same date as my wife, 1952, 28 years before my wife, British writer and speaker, describes himself as the most controversial speaker in the world. He's the author of 19 books as of 2013, and has attracted a global following that cuts across the political spectrum. His 533-page The Biggest Secret, 1999, has been called the Rosetta Stone for conspiracy junkies. Icke was a well-known BBC television sports presenter and spokesman for the Green Party, when in 1990 a psychic told him he was a healer who had been placed on and that the spirit world was going to pass messages to him so he could educate others. In 1991, he held a press conference to announce that he was the son of the Godhead, a son of the Godhead, a phrase he said later the media had misunderstood. Ike told the BBC's Terry Wogan show that the world would soon be devastated by tidal waves and earthquakes. In The Robots' Rebellion, 1994, and The Truth Shall Set You Free, 1995, The Biggest Secret, 1999, and Children of the Matrix, 2001, Ike set out on a moral, political worldview that combined New Age spiritualism with a passionate denunciation of totalitarian trends, in which many prominent figures are reptilian, including George W. Bush, Queen Elizabeth II, Chris Christopherson, and Boxcar Willie. That's the one that always threw me. Queen Elizabeth, George W. Bush, and Boxcar Willie. Michael Barkin has described Ike's position as New Age conspiracism. Richard Kahn and Tyson Lewis argue that the reptilian hypothesis may simply be Swiftian satire, a way of giving ordinary people a narrative with which to question what they see around them. And by the way, since all this, Jesse Ventura, former governor of Minnesota, former wrestler, movie star, and all of that stuff, really took Ike to task a couple of years ago. And I think Ike walked out on him during a broadcast. So very interesting guy. Let me take a sip of coffee and we'll move on. Nigel, a lizard, Beth. I almost had coffee coming out my nose on that. Sorry, a lizard, Beth. Thank you for that, Nigel. All right. Here we go. Leslie, you've met David Icke many times. Or did you meet him? Or you met Jesse Ventura? Jesse Ventura, I liked him. You know, politically speaking, I remember when he was running for the governor of Minnesota back in 1992, I think it was. And I had my office all set up in uptown Minneapolis. And I was listening to the news one day and watching it. And they had a clip of Jesse Ventura up in northern Minnesota, little taconite mining town up there. Now, you go north Minnesota toward the Canadian border, you're talking North Woods up there. I mean, the whole state is North Woods. You got the Boundary Waters canoe area up there, the Boundary Waters, all the national forests up there. It's gorgeous. But these little taconite mining towns are all through there. And he was walking down the street in Eveleth, I think it was, Minnesota. And he's got crowds of people around him. He's running for governor. And somebody heckles him from the crowd and says something stupid to him. I don't even know what it was. And Ventura looks over at him. It's right on camera. And he says, "Yeah, well, I don't need your vote, asshole." And I said right there, I was watching it. I started laughing. And I said, I don't care what his political stance is. Just because he did that, I'm going to vote for him. So there you go. Anyway, Jesse the Body Ventura, watched him wrestle back in the day. Yeah, so did I. So whenever I encounter self-proclaimed gods and messiahs, despite their well-meaning messages of peace toward all, unity among fellow man, and self-growth based on a philosophical foundation that we are all little gods within the universal collective, I tend to write them off rather quickly, simply for the self-labeling, good or bad philosophical beliefs notwithstanding. I used to have a great word that you've all used for all these people. It's the same people who would come up to me in the hundreds of events I did and things I did while over the years, where they'd come up to me and half the time they were half in the bag, but they'd always say something like, "I'm psychic." And I was just like, bullshit. It would go in my bullshit can. I have this metaphoric bullshit can that sits outside my desk, and it kind of follows me around like a little R2D2, imaginary R2D2, my bullshit can. And we could call it BSC1, bullshit can 1. And follows me around, and there's so many things I encounter that you just bullshit can, flick it in. Nigel says Ike was going through a traumatic time back then. I remember seeing that interview at that time. He was, actually, and I think I addressed that a little bit here. It goes on. Let me see where my sentence ended. Be it my past education in theology, or my years of thinking, writing, and mulling over history, religion, and spirituality, or simply my exposure to and study of history's cavalcade of messianic figures who accomplished little other than leading their followers and themselves to bitter ends, it's at the moment of self-proclamation, messianic revelation, of self-proclaimed messianic revelation, that I lose interest and cluck my tongue. When I read that Ike compares himself to a god, substantiated by his many public appearances and rare granted interviews, I know what he's getting at from the standpoint of a new age way of thinking. I also understand what he's getting at, by the way, when we say we're all gods. I get that part of it. It's the self-proclaimed messianic role that always would throw me. Sure, the concept that we're all gods, that we collectively comprise the greater good and have within us the ability to rise to spiritual heights, is not necessarily a thing to be reviled, no matter what your spirituality or religious or non-religious status may be. However, when those spiritual concepts, not uncommon to many religions and spiritual trains of thought and practice, are hitched to the wagon of fringe conspiracy theories that focus on ancient alien reptilians from another star system and are working behind the scenes to draw energy off the evil and corruption of humanity, while at the same time pulling the strings behind such mythical groups as the Illuminati, I tend to think the Messiah has stepped off the surface of the water and sunk into the sea of self-adulation, entangling himself and his followers in the seaweed of self-deception. Ike's boiled-down philosophies are not uncommon to the New Age thinking community. He blends staples of the metaphysical discussion about the nature of the universe and consciousness with over-the-top conspiracy theories about public figures ranging from world politicians, religious leaders, and Hollywood celebrities to members of Europe's royal families. But where he adds a decidedly sinister twist is when he openly accuses them of being satanic pedophiles, child killers, shapeshifters, mass murderers, serial killers, and worse. What seems like unconnected political and social events are, in fact, according to Ike, attempts by a hidden reptilian race to subvert and control humanity. And I've got footnote numbers and all this. And by the way, since I've written this, I've talked a lot with Jeff Doughty, and I've listened to a lot of what he said, and I've studied a lot of this stuff. And I think there might be more to this than I was passing it off as back then. I don't think David Icke is... I have to be very careful when I say this. I get him. I get what he teaches. I don't, however, think he is all as far off as I made him to be in this book. We'll go on, and I give him a little bit of laud here in this, but there's more here. Let's go on. In his book, The Biggest Secret, Icke contends that human beings are the product of an extraterrestrial genetic engineering program launched by a race of reptilians called the Anunnaki, who came down to Earth from a solar system in the constellation of Draco. How he makes his connection to reptilians is as obscure as a few pieces of statuary and a heavy reliance on the works of Zecharia Sitchin. In part, he embraces the ancient Sumerian account of Enki's creation of primeval man as a slave race for the other gods. But he goes beyond merely hailing to ancient mythology as fact expounding that reality is a holographic experience. The only true reality is the realm of the absolute, which he illustrates by making comparison to the Hollywood movie The Matrix, which, by the way, I mentioned Ian Punnett. The first I really delved into that was with his little group called the Dead Theologian Society, which Ian had in relation to his radio show. And we met a couple of times a month at one of the bookstores locally. I mentioned that before. And we talked about the Matrix and the different elements within the Matrix that drew. It's like I talk about the show Supernatural, drawing on things that are a little deeper than the surface issue of the movie or the television show itself. I'm not a fan of Sitchin either, by the way, Suze. As I said in one of the earlier chapters, I think he squeezes too many square pegs into too many round holes, and he mistranslated the languages. He force-fit his theories to make them work. And that, to me, is faulty scholarship and poor academics. Let's see. In part, Ike embraces the ancient Sumerian account of Enki's creation of primeval man as a slave race for the other gods. I read that. All right. He teaches a philosophy of collective consciousness built on intentionality, reincarnation, a loose adapted understanding of string theory, and other galactic worlds that exist alongside ours on other planes of frequency. He contends that our life experiences alter our DNA by downloading new information and overriding the software of our conscious state. Might not be wrong. And that we attract experiences to ourselves by means of good and bad thoughts. Now that's pure psychology. Remember when we were talking about Freud and Adler in an earlier chapter? Adler said we set our goals on things in the future. We put our aspirations out there and we draw ourselves to that. That's kind of what he's saying here in a certain extent. All in all, a mixture of current metaphysical thought with alien conspiracy theory as well as modern psychology, and frankly, very appealing on many levels to those who have been disillusioned by science and religion and are seeking something different to assuage their loneliness or dissatisfaction with the status quo. I have to say something on the loneliness issue too. Have you noticed that a lot of people who really want this stuff to be real, they're not scientists, they're not into deep research. They follow guys that write books like this. And a lot of them are lonely people who need something to fill the void. And they filled it with that. We used to, when I was in ministry, we used to refer to this psychological thing in the human psyche as, poetically, I used to call it, there's a God-shaped vacuum in everyone's heart that they try to fill with everything except what actually fits the vacuum, and that's God. They'll plug it in with things, with what's the word I'm looking for? Not monetary, material things. And it doesn't fit, and they shake it all out and start all over. It's sex with everything else. Never works until they finally plug in the right puzzle piece, and then that fulfills them. That's the way I used to refer to this in my ministry days. The same thing is going on with people. They're looking for something to fill that gap and that void, and many times they will find that these are things that give them a hope. It sounds like a weird thing to have hope in, but some of these people live every day hoping that we'll have that alien contact, that will bring those beings and that are going to offer us something better than not what mankind really experiences. Humanity is one thing. Individuals are another. It's what they are missing in their lives. And so that's the stuff. And Barbara, yeah, I see that. Yeah, you used to be very lonely, and it did draw me into those topics, but I started meditation and haven't been lonely since, not one day. That's it. You have to draw on self in these things, or God, or whatever your object of worship is, sometimes helps you with that. But objects of worship, such as God and Jesus Christ, by many of these people, are supplanted with the surrogate being sometimes atheism, sometimes skepticism, sometimes deep fomenting belief in aliens and ghosts and all these. And these are the things that draw them into filling that gap or trying to fill that gap. I'm sure, it is very easy to understand how simply listening to Ike and reading his work can draw one in. His converts are, I am sure, people who have considered both aspects of his foundational thinking and simply not dug deeply enough to see the missteps and calculated misinterpretations. David Icke is certainly not the first to have mentioned reptilian aliens, but he claims he's been the one to have pioneered the road to a better understanding of who the reptilians really are and why they continue to interact and influence earthly humans. From the secretive governmental control to world domination, ancient religious roots to modern-day New Ageism, reptilians, according to Icke, have been known for their secret agenda. And although we do not have a clear picture of what their true intentions may be, we are able to gather from history the signs and traces of their past actions and influences with ancient human civilizations. Accounts from Aztecs, Greeks, Chinese mythology, and history leaves us clues as to an ancient race of aliens that perhaps helped and aided the building of our civilizations, past and present. He has thrown, that was a quote, by the way, from him. He has thrown the ancient alien theory on its head by attributing his particular brand of conspiracy to them. And I want you to notice something, too, that all these things are really the same kind of thing. What David Icke is pushing, what church pushes, different spiritualities. There are very few that rise above this into a different realm. Because it's all these things we want to plug into why the universe works the way it does. David Icke says it's reptilians. Somebody else will come along and tell you it's the demonic that does that behind the scenes. I talked the other day about John Zaffis, who is the nephew to now both the late Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were launched into paranormal fame when they were the first ones to go into the Amityville house back in the early 70s. John picked up their mantle and has done this his whole life as well. But John was the person who told me, when talking about demonology, I asked him the question in an interview. I said, John, do you think that there are demonic forces working behind world governments? And he said, oh, absolutely. He says, and he gave his reasons why he believed this that were pretty sound. He said he believes that there was a given demonic entity for each and every one of the world leaders that operates behind the scenes. They may even be embodied, but they are certainly a spiritual influence. This is nothing different than what David Icke is saying, only his object of that influence, that evil influence, is different. Icke purports that reptilians today are believed to have shape-shifting abilities that enable them to secretly work their agenda behind the scenes, hidden within the bodies of ruling classes of Europe, in the majority of U.S. Presidents and political figures, not to mention prominent entertainment and pop cultural personages the world over. Icke reports that he's found evidence that our political structure and economic systems have already been influenced by these evil, cunning, crafty, a word used to define Nakash, remember, the serpent character in the Garden of Eden, reptilians, who have worked for thousands of years behind the scenes of human history. These alien intruders for at least 6,000 to 8,000 years have seduced, through their cloned counterfeit political leaders and royal personages, the hearts and minds of all humanity, who are blinded to their existence. All the while, these reptilian overlords are plotting their secret agenda and have been slowly fostering chaos throughout human history, waiting for the right time for the ultimate conquest of our planet. During his aptly named turquoise period, this might be what Nigel was referring to earlier, in which Icke and his wife dressed only in the color turquoise, due to his claim of some metaphysical effect that acts as a conduit for receiving positive energy. Ike writes that he had been channeling beings from another world and via automatic writing and had received messages from extraterrestrials telling him that he was a son of the Godhead. In other words, a Messiah. After the clamoring controversy and criticisms that ensued after the release of that statement, Ike later attempted to backpedal his statement, amending it and reinterpreting Son of the Godhead as the infinite mind. After his experience in 1990, he met Deborah Shaw, a British psychic living in Calgary, Alberta. Ike began a relationship with Shaw, and the couple had a daughter the next year. Shaw and her infant daughter moved in with Ike and his wife. That's pretty damn tolerant, I'd tell you. Well, I often wonder, what would my wife Rainey, would she allow the woman I had an affair with, or at least a sexual dalliance with, and had my child, to move into the house with us? I think after she punched out her lights, probably, and mine, with a baseball bat while I was sleeping. Shaw and her infant daughter moved in with Ike and his wife, and she changed her name to Mary Shawson. Ike's wife changed her name to Michaela, which she said was an expression of the archangel Michael. The eclectic trio was dubbed by the British press as the Turquoise Triangle. You have to think that anyone who predicts the end of the world must be a true believer in his or her ability to prognosticate world events, or have some real deep-set faith in his or her ability as a channeler or a psychic. Ike made himself part of this short list of doomsayers when he publicly prophesied that the world would end in 1997. That was now 15 years ago, as the writing of this book, which was in 2012, late 2012, which is now, which would now be, 21 years ago, something like that, 22 years ago, in case you're counting, as of this writing. The end of the world as we knew it, according to Ike, would have preceded, it's the end of the world as we know it. The end of the world as we knew it, according to Ike, would be preceded by a number of disasters, including a severe hurricane around the Gulf of Mexico and New Orleans. Now, there's a stretch. A hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. Do I sound skeptical? Volcanic eruptions on the island of Cuba. Disruption in China. A hurricane in Derry, and an earthquake on the Isle of Arran, which is in the Irish Sea between Scotland and Ireland. He also said that in that interview that Los Angeles would become an island. New Zealand would disappear, and the cliffs of Kent would be underwater by Christmas of that year. Ike told reporters that the information contained in this world-ending prophecy had been passed on to him through channeling the voices in his head. That's where I have many of my problems sprouting, when I channel the voices in my head. Anyway, moving on. I'm making fun. Sorry, David. Which was physically transmitted through automatic writing. As of the writing of this book, Ike is still holding enormous stadium events today, filling sports arenas for his 10-hour conferences. To me, this merely reaffirms my contention and aptly illustrates the fact that the world is hungry for something, and people will look for the things they feel are missing in any outlet available. When science and religion fail us, we look to anything to fill the void. Think about that. We all do it. Of course, the end of the world prophecy saw 1997 come and go without incident. Ike later wrote in that he had felt out of control during that press conference where he uttered his prophecy, almost as if he wasn't the one saying the words. He said that he heard his own voice predict the end of the world, yet was completely appalled at what was spilling out of his own mouth. Quote, I was speaking the words, but all the time I could hear the voice of the brakes in the background saying, David, what the hell are you saying? End quote. To Ike's great dismay, His prophecies were splashed all over the front page news the next morning. In and of themselves, there would seem to be no real harm to Ike's channeling-driven, automatically written script and his alien, reptilian overrun worldview. If a guy wants to read the works of Zecharia Sitchin and add his own twist, insisting that the Sumerian pantheon of Anunnaki gods were a race of reptile aliens with evil intent, still governing our human affairs from behind a curtain of subterfuge, placing reptilians in seats of high political power throughout the ages, imposters in an exterior skin of cloned human flesh, infiltrating their way into all the ruling families of the world, who am I to tell him no? How was that for a run-on sentence? If the man has built a following that buys books, pays to attend his conferences, and he is, by the way, a phenomenal, eloquent, moving public speaker, and promulgate his views, why should any of us care? They're not hurting anybody. If that is the niche David Icke has found to fill his coffers and pay the electric bill, and if people have so little to believe in that they ascribe to his views, which frankly, I have a hard time believing even Icke himself fully believes everything he says, then more power to him. After all, blended throughout his alien message is a more overt call for people to take action against the abuses and oppressions of government, the seeking of world unity in contrast to the New World Order, and the gaining of inner godlike awareness and tranquility. What's so wrong with that? Whatever the vehicle of delivery of the message, the ends justifies the means, and if the world becomes a better place, even if we have to foist upon the common mind the notion that we don't pursue these things, the reptilians will get a stronger foothold and destroy our world and have us all for lunch. No matter if you're exploiting information and creating a revenue stream, while at the same time foisting peace and unity is the answer, despite how disgusted one might be with the methods, he is ultimately pushing a good thing. Right? But there is a much more insidious aspect to David Icke's assertions. The reptilians that he claims exist and operate behind the scenes of humanity are ones he links to the bloodlines of Cain. Where have you heard that in this book? The Merovingians and the Luciferian lineage. He speaks a form of anti-Semitism buried in a twisted worldview of history, linking the Jews with the Illuminati and the New World Order. The Jews, Icke purports, are the reptilian populated, controlled, manipulated race seeking world dominion through their positions held in the wealthy, ruling, and royal families of Europe and the Western world. The chosen people of the Old Testament are a plague to humanity. And the heinous underpinning of his teachings is that his foundations are laced with historical fact, yet merged into his reptilian Illuminati views. And I got to tell you, I have a problem with that. I'm the farthest thing you could find from an anti-Semite. Jeff and I have had many conversations on this, and we disagree with certain things about the Jews and about Israel. More, I think, probably more accurately, Israel, modern-day Israel. But I have always been a supporter of Israel. I have always been a supporter of the Jews. Most of this, I will admittedly say, comes from my background in biblical studies and seminary training and ministry and all the research and study I did for that, biblical studies, where the Jews were the chosen people of God, according to the Jews, and that the Messiah came out of that. And so what I believed at the time as a Christian, having accepted Jesus into my heart, Jesus was a Jew, and he was the fulfillment of Jewish prophecy, and that the Jews, there was a prophetic calendar that said there was this parenthetical age that fit between the time Jesus came and the time he would come again in the second coming, the end times, the tribulation, the rapture, the Great Millennial Kingdom, all of those things, was when the calendar would pick up with the Jews again, because they had rejected Messiah and so on. That was what we were taught. And it wasn't anti-Semite, though some people thought we were, just for saying some of those things. It was very pro-Semitic. It is one of saying, we believe that God has a plan for the Jews, but you have to accept Christ too. That was what we taught. That's what we believed. But as a result of all of that, I have always had a soft place in my heart for Israel, for the Jews, for supporting Israel. Jeff and Rocky both once asked me, why do you support Israel? And I had to stop and think, because of all the things that people have problems with. I had to think about that and say, it's because I always have, and I don't have a better reason than that. I have to think that through to articulate it to you guys better. And so I've always been pro-Jewish. And I think I've mentioned while doing these readings that my own grandfather, my mom's stepfather, my mom was an Edwards. My dad was a Roberts. Very British, very Welsh in descent. My mom's mother, after World War II, married Oscar Gould, or comes from Goldstein. Young man back then. He became my mother, who was about 4 years old at the time, became her stepfather. And she grew up with him. And so my family, when I was a kid in the 60s and in the 70s, my grandfather was a Jewish man. And he was very close to our family. And so our little family, as I just said very recently here, our little family of my mom, my older brother, and my younger sister, we four were the four goy in an ocean of Judaism in my family. And so I grew up around that. I grew up around a lot of, if you will, stereotypical American Jewish family behavior with our extended relatives. I remember my aunt, who was my mom's sister, much younger than my mom, and my grandfather's blood daughter, so she was my mom's half-sister. We were sitting in 1982 when Star Trek The Wrath of Khan came out. And we're sitting in the theater together watching that. She was a big Star Trek fan. And during Spock's funeral in that, sorry, there's a spoiler alert if you haven't seen that nearly 40-year-old movie yet. Spock dies in that movie. And there's a funeral at the end, and Scotty is playing the bagpipes at Spock's funeral. And my aunt, she leans to me in the theater and she says, and she didn't talk this way all the time. It was just when she was being funny, or, you know, the background comes in. She goes, Scotty, when I should die, she said, that's what I want. I want bagpipes at my funeral. Very Yiddish sounding when she said it, but she wasn't that way all the time. She was very American, very down to earth, urban city dweller. And so, uh-oh, Amanda. sorry. Spock dies in that one. But he comes back in 3. Oh, I gave that one away now too. Anyway, so I will say this. The anecdote to that little story is that my aunt passed away in 1995 rather suddenly of an illness. She was 11 years older than me, and that was it. In 95, I was 35, so she was only 46 years old. And she died rather suddenly. And so her husband was an idiot, drug addict, whatever, a loser. And so it was left to me to kind of put together all the funeral details. So you know what I did? I hired a bagpiper. And this was, what would this be? 13 years after we saw that movie. I hired a bagpiper. And in this little domed, if you're from Minneapolis, over in the uptown area by Lake of the Isles, Lake Calhoun, you know of the Lakewood Cemetery. And there's this domed chapel there that could probably seat about 400 people. and very echoey and reverberating. It's all meant to be solemn and all of this. And so we've got, in that auditorium, we had all of the non-Jewish people were on this side, and all of the Jewish family were on this side of the main aisle. And I don't think there was segregation other than just everybody sat with everybody they knew. And I had that bagpiper come in, and he played Amazing Grace on the bagpipes, just like my aunt said, when I should die, have that played at my funeral. And so that's blaring and echoing off the wall, the dome in there. And I know all the Jews collectively turned their heads, were like, they heard Amazing Grace, or what the hell is that? And so anyway, that's the little tying the knot in that little anecdotal story. And I've got to remember now why I even brought that up, other than the Jews being the chosen people. I always believed that. I always stuck with it. And I even have personal reasons for that. So let's move on. There's only a one long paragraph left of this chapter, and then we're going to move on into the end matter of the book. Now, I'll give the last paragraph that I read. And the heinous underpinning of David Icke's teachings are that his foundations are laced with historical fact, yet merged into his reptilian Illuminati views. This is not to say that the man does not adhere to good philosophies that stand for the betterment of humanity, but that is the hook that draws an inordinate amount of people, of followers, to his philosophies. Truth and fact, mixed with bizarre theorizing, make for the propagation of a message that is all at once appealing and stimulating to the curious, who are dying for answers to convert our world from what they view as a place of evil and oppression to one of peace and harmony. Throughout his career, David Icke has professed to having long stood against many political and social systems that may be comprised by the reptilian alien agenda. And although reptilian alien race, I missed a sentence there. And although reptilians continue to make their push against humanity, many believe that we have protectors from yet another constellation, watching their every move and awaiting their chance to move against the alien reptilian race and their agenda on the planet Earth. Although many of the subjects related to reptilian aliens or intelligent life elsewhere is usually left to the science fiction authors and fanatics, David Icke continues to push his own alien agenda toward what he believes to be the truth that has been hidden from the public for ages. And that comes out of his own writings. And that's the end of chapter 7. But we're nowhere near done yet tonight, folks, because we're going to move in to the conclusion as well. And there's something that will feel this way tonight. Is like, I jump to the end of this and conclude this very quickly. I tie the knot. Well, keep in mind, we've just spent, 200 pages going through all the background historically, mythologically, legends, theology, every little ology you can think of, examining this issue. And now we're going to draw the knot. I could have written a book that was 3 times this long just to hit the basics, but I didn't. I wanted to hit these things I told you about a little earlier. So let's move into this conclusion now. And Amanda says, easy as to make. I think that's what you're talking about, the conclusion. We're in the time of unveiling the Bibles that the Bible speaks of. No amount, if I can speak English, you can't enter now either. Okay, you guys are talking about something there. I'm just looking back to see if there's anything I want to hit before going into this conclusion. Audrey says, cremate me, stuff me in a huge firework, and shoot me in the sky. I have said to my wife, and it's in my will, it just says, when I die, do whatever's cheapest. If it's cremating me and spreading the ashes, do that. You can even get rid of the ashes. It doesn't matter. Just let my kids remember me. You remember me. And I don't need to be put in a box so everybody can look at my dead body. Do it cheap. Don't spend $10,000 on a modern casket. Burn me and scatter my ashes. Just get rid of me. And you don't even have to put me on the fireplace mantle. Jeannie says, I don't have my tartan anymore. I've got kilts. I've got kilts hanging in my closet. I don't have my Roberts of Wales tartan, though. I'm going to get that one. Let's move on. Conclusion. The continued presence of the serpent. As we've seen throughout this entire book, the presence of the serpent as a thing of both good and evil began as early as the recorded history of humanity and has coursed its meandering trail down through the ages. If indeed the imagery and symbolism is a result of ancient humankind's face-to-face encounters with non-human entities in the form of reptilians, the case of history does not bear out that fact. You get that, folks? Historical research doesn't bear that out. You cannot quantify or qualify that claim about reptilians. Doesn't mean they don't exist. It means you can't bear it out. You can't prove it. What we know for a certainty is that the symbolic form of the serpent was inextricably linked with the worship and the veneration of the serpent since the dawn of civilization. In the presence of the serpent serpent linked to the Luciferian? Does the serpent crawl on its belly solely due to the spoken judgment of God in the book of Genesis? Or is that simply representative of one version of the serpent in human religion and religious mythology? The seemingly as of yet unanswerable questions are codependence with our ability as humans to reach the unreachable and pierce the unpierceable. In the vastness of the universe, we are awfully big for our own britches when we think we have the answers to the most elusively quantifiable of questions. To not know all the answers in the beginning of exploration, that is precisely what I believe we set out to do in all of our sciences, our histories, our archaeologies and anthropologies, let alone the verbose pomposity of our philosophies. For me, the pervasive presence of the serpent through our human existence on this planet, our spiritualities, religions, legends, and mythologies represent an enduring symbol of something or someone that had such great impact on early humanity and their civilizations that it pressed and a deeply encoded imprint in our collective psyche that has endured nearly all others, equaled only by our innate need for a deity. Those equally dichotomous quantities have been present with us, family to us, and governing aspects of who and what we are, and surely will continue to be so, prompting further seeking, questions, and digging for the reasons why. And that's my conclusion. And I move into this little afterword that I wrote afterward. And it's a few pages here. So here we go. Let's get into this. It's a river. As you've seen in the preceding pages of this book, the amount of information that stems from one simple thought to the next is filled to overbrimming with tributaries branching off the main artery into other tributaries, stemming into hundreds of branches, little creeks, streams, coulees, and swampy backwaters with inlets and outlets of their own. As I stated at the very start of this book, the implications of the comparative historical and religious touchpoints are so far-reaching that the meanderings of myth one must follow to seek efficacious tendrils of fact could most certainly drive one mad in its contemplation. It has nearly brought me to that point, not due to the content of the mythologies and the varied philosophies, but based upon the overwhelming mountain range of information to sift through and weigh against fact, fiction, insanity, and spirituality. And those distinctions are sometimes very difficult to decipher. What is one person's religion is another's folly, leaving plenty of room for criticism, naysaying, and propagandizing. There were many times in the writing of this little book that I saw myself as a literary version of Meriwether Lewis on his quest to discover the Northwest Passage to the Great Western Pacific. And I speak, of course, of Lewis and Clark. We all know, by the way, with modern history, that Meriwether Lewis had bouts of depression. And he dealt with that and eventually led to his death, unless you go into the conspiracy theories that he was murdered. After weeks and months of forging through seemingly untraversable terrain, he came finally through the foothills and low mountains. It was at that point that Lewis scaled a nearby ridge, certain he was going to see the Pacific Ocean stretched across the horizon as he reached the top of that ridge. When he got to the top of the ridge and gazed out at what lay beyond, fully expecting to see the Pacific Ocean, all he saw was mile upon mile, range upon range of the craggy, snow-crested Bitterroot Mountains that went as far as the eye could see. His spirit sank, and he was overcome with the feeling that he'd never find his way. His thoughts of enduring the hardship of the quest for even a single mile more turned into the despair that accompanies the feeling of having come too far to go back, but not far enough to find completion or redemption. Despite his inner turmoil, he pressed on and eventually cleared the mountains and pine forests of the Northwest and stepped onto the sandy beach of accomplishment, the salty waves of the Pacific Ocean lapping at the soles of his boots. For me, seeking the reptilian factor and the connectivity of the serpent in human history and religious myth has been all-consuming, and just when I feel I've fulfilled the goal and stepped to the ridge of conclusion, there, stretching out before me as far as the eye can see, is another range of snow-capped peaks, each bearing a new rocky climb. It's the looking for the way through that seems daunting while you're in it. Then when you finally get there, you look back at the terrain you've traversed and wonder about all the wondrous, undiscovered country in other regions extending off to the right or the left of the trail that brought you to this place. Yet despite all the unexplored territory, you're satisfied that you have at least forged a single path to the other side. Our ancient past is filled with amazing stories of beings who governed our existence, whether they were gods descended from the heavens, extraterrestrial beings making their presence known while perhaps undergoing their own explorations, or whether they are simply comprised of deified human royal bloodlines and the stuffs of overwrought imaginings and religious control. Whichever it may be, in reality, they represent the mysterious elements of our past that have comprised the modern mythologies of today. If we take but a moment to stop ourselves in the tracks of our busy work schedules, hang up the phone, shut off the television and the internet, close the calendar, stop shopping and mowing the grass, and simply unplug for a few moments and listen to the quiet, we'll find that those voices are still speaking, beckoning us to come find them. Conclusively answering whether or not extraterrestrial serpentine beings interacted with humanity and continue to make their presence felt from the stealthy shadows is as simplistically easy as finding God sitting on his patio having a cup of Darjeeling. What is certain is that humanity has been writing about these things since they first developed the skill set to record their personal histories. The plethora of occultists, religious apologists, scientists, true believers, skeptics, and experiencers can accomplish only one thing, and that is the presentation of the facts as they understand them. That is why all we are left with, beyond establishing points of history anthropology and archaeology, the bare tools of the trade, are the facts which sometimes controvert the theories. The things that seem to really matter to the questioning mind most often never have solid answers. I am again brought to the words of Richard Feynman, astrophysicist, contemporary of Oppenheimer and Einstein. And by the way, what just popped into my mind, in my fictional book, The Rollicking Adventures of Tam O'Hare, I've got him at one place in the book where he picks up a handful of sand and lets the sand sift through his hands. And he says, the whole question of the divine, he says, is like this. He says, you pick up the sand and yet it sifts through your hand until there's nothing left. And you never really can draw the answers for the things that are truly the most important. There's never really the solid answers. There's always something that prevents you from getting right to that point of conclusiveness, other than what you decide to do in your own heart and mind. Richard Feynman said this: if you expected science could give you all the answers to the wonderful questions about what we are, or where we're going, or what the meaning of the universe is, and so on, then I think you could become easily disillusioned and then look for some mystic answer to these problems. I can live with doubt and uncertainty and not knowing. I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers which might be wrong. I have approximate answers and possible beliefs and differing degrees of certainty about different things, but I'm not absolutely sure about anything. And there are many things I don't know anything about at all. But I don't have to know an answer. I don't feel frightened by not knowing things, about being lost in a mysterious universe without having any purpose. I can't believe in the special stories that have been made up about our special relationship to the universe, because they seem to be too simple, too connected, too provincial, too local. The earth, he came to the earth. One of the aspects of God came to the earth. Mind you, and look what's out there. It just isn't in proportion. Anyway, it's no use arguing it. We should look to see what's true and what may not be true. Once you start doubting, which for me is a fundamental part of my soul, to doubt and ask, and to doubt and ask, it gets a little harder to believe. Did a race of reptilians come to this planet a long time ago? Did extraterrestrials seed the human race or genetically engineer primordial humanoids, creating a slave race? Hominids, I'm sorry, not humanoids. Creating a slave race? Were humans freed from bondage, led by a traitor from the ranks of the alien oppressors? Is there an extraterrestrial race that is sifted in and out of humanity's affairs for all of recorded history, governing our destiny from the shadows? Or are we a race that simply evolves and grows, learning from the past and moving beyond our old superstitions and mythologies? Are we bound by a religious thought and man-made myth only to suffer at its invisible grasp until we move beyond the need for false messiahs and imagined gods, spirits, devils, and monsters that subjugate us to our own fears? Or is it truly that we're the creation of a one true God, and all the rest is simply concocted, fabricated veil of lies and deceit, obfuscation and illusion that enslaves us to the dictates of the demonic evil that would stand in the way of our knowing God in a more real, meaningful way? These are the questions that I sincerely hope you're left pondering when closing the cover of this book. It's obvious that God does not go out of his way to present his case in a fashion that is not old, cracked, and crumbling as the last surviving manuscripts telling his story. Accordingly, his opponents seem to work much harder gaining proselytes than he spends attempting to bring us to him. And so answering the call of religion, even when told it's supposed to be a personal loving God in charge, is a much more daunting challenge than simply believing things are what they are. So toss the coin in the air, or better yet, roll your 22-sided die. Are we simply creatures of the behest of some greater power, or are a race that lives, thrives, and grows off, and in spite of its misty history and scaly mythologies, has humanity experienced the visitations of non-human entities? Trust no one. Listen to no one. Adhere to no one. Grasp the gift of exploration and seek out the answers for yourself. For if you are comfortable simply living by the dictates of what someone else asks you to do, then you're doomed to live that life of constrained servitude. Think for yourself, Jeff might say, and unindoctrinate yourself. And before you know it, the answers will make themselves as evident as the nose on your face. The realization that all that remains in the end is a kind of forbidden knowledge, a rage with and beyond reason against reason itself. As exiles from the comforts of bondage, we are composers of a cognitive music that is not a spirituality or a religion, nor is it an eschewing of either, but it's a religion of no religion, a faith of no faith, a belief of no belief. And yet, there's that still small voice. Aldous Huxley said, "Extinguished theologians lie about the cradle of every science as the strangled snakes behind that of Hercules." And that's the end. After that are just the notes, the anecdotes, the bibliography, and all of that. So there you go, folks. The Secret History of the Reptilians, the pervasive presence of the serpent in a human history, religion, and alien mythos. I hope and trust that you've enjoyed this reading and my commentary. I've got a lot to say about this. I think we could probably go on. And if you're patient with me here for just a second, I'm going to look, I'm going to switch out of this program here and go look for the missing chapter, which I think I may have. It's not a whole chapter. It's about 10 minutes worth of reading. Let me take a quick look and see if I've got it here or not. And if it's not here, I'll find it and we'll talk about that another night. But let's see here. If I scroll down in my folders to Reptilian book, and I go to chapter breakdowns, and I don't even know what chapter this would be in. I'm not sure. The author preface, 500 words, table of contents, reviews, forward, questions. Give me a second here. We might be able to find it. I think it was in chapter 5. So I'm going to call up chapter 5 and just see if it's here. No, it is not. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. Better yet, I'm going to walk you over to my academia site. It's academia.edu, where I've got articles written. And if you go to my website, scottallenroberts.com, and click on the articles link, you can get there. And I've got the Serpent and Alien Mythos as one of my posted articles. Let me just take a look at this and see if this is what I'm looking for. It may or may not be. I'm going to get to the end of this and see if that's what's there. Let's see. It would be a section about the blood. Nope, because there's hitting below Orion's belt. This is not the place where I thought I would find it. My reptile can kick your lizard's ass. If you remember that chapter section. And nope, it is not here. Something completely different. So I'll find that, and it was something like the serpent scion, something like that, and I don't know where that is now. I'll find it, and we'll definitely cover that one of these days. I'll say, here's that missing chapter I talked about. So, folks, go down below, hit the like button. I'd appreciate that. Share these videos. Now we're all done. So I'm going to take all these videos that we've done for the rise and fall of the Nephilim. It's already in its own section. I'm going to do the same with the secret history of the Reptilians. Down below, if you just look, if you're here on my homepage here on YouTube, go down below. You'll see all my videos from not just the readings, but all kinds of other things I've done. You can see things from trips to Egypt, adventures there, adventures with Rocky Stucci and John Ward doing paranormal investigative work. We got videos down below, stuff with my family, things like that. And I think you'll enjoy them. And so that's it for tonight. We finished another book. Now, what I've got left to read to you, I've got a couple of other books, as you know. I have, we're not going to start this right away tomorrow, of course. And it's not sitting right here right now. But I've got The Exodus Reality, which is the book John Ward and I wrote about the historical Moses, which I think you'll really enjoy. Some of my stuff in that book I recapped in this book when we talked about Moses and Senenmut and Hatshepsut. But there's a lot more to that book. And there's lots of pictures in that book, too. So I may do that one. I've also got a book that it's stashed away somewhere. I wrote an anthology piece for a book where there's Eric von Daniken, Micah Hanks, Philip Coppens, all kinds of other authors who've contributed to this anthology work, where I wrote about Cain and the other people. We'll read that, and we'll comment on that. And also, if you'd like something completely and totally different, one of these days in the near future, we'll read from, well, I don't see where it is. We'll read The Rollicking Adventures of Tam O'Hare. And that'll be like storybook time. That's it. There it is right here. If you haven't seen this book, this is a book I wrote and illustrated, 10, 12 years ago now. But I re-released it back 2 years ago in color. It was published by Morgan James, and I bought the rights to the book and re-released it. And it's filled with color illustrations. And this story, it's anthropomorphized. So we might just read that for the hell of it, for the fun of it. The length of this book is about half both of the books I've already read to you. And it's a total fiction, and it's written for young adults. So it's easy to understand, but it's involved as well. It's funny. I wrote the book and marketed it to ages 8 through 14, kind of that upper grade school to middle school age. And do you know the biggest reading audience and buying audience was college age and up? So that's the level of the book. So we'll look at that, and we'll look at reading that. I think you'll really enjoy it. And what comes to mind is Yeats' poem. It's at the beginning of the book, The Stolen Child, where William Butler Yeats, poet laureate of Ireland at the turn of the last century, the 20th century, was a big believer in the fae and the fairy folk as being real. And he had his good reasons for it. And I didn't understand that at first, and I do now. But he wrote in The Stolen Child, "Come away, O little child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand." And the book is about that. It's about the characters in it. And it's anthropomorphized, but you wouldn't know that if you didn't know it. So I wanted to show you this before we're done. I came across this. I unloaded my storeroom and found boxes, and I didn't think I had any of the physical copies of this left. When I talked about the Paradigm Symposium, it was a branch of Intrepid magazine, which I published after I left the Ghost Hunters outfit and TAPS Paramag. I launched Intrepid magazine, and I found a copy in our boxes. And this is what our magazine looked like. And that just so happens to be John Ward on the cover. And I'd done a big interview with him. This was back in, this was Volume 2, Issue 1. January of 2014 was when this came out. And so it was John Ward and a big interview with him. We had some of our writers. We had Marie D. Jones, Larry Flaxman, Mark Collins, David Roll, Dr. David Roll, who disagreed with our theory on the Exodus, by the way, Cassidy O'Connor. And there's some fantastic stuff in here. And you can see this is where I wrote about the Senenmut connection. This is what the magazine looked like. I'm thinking of relaunching this magazine. I would love to put this magazine out again. And it was a lot of fun. It was just a lot of work on the side. And you know, Mr. Roberts, that's my my publisher's page. And you can see here that this is how we looked. This was all the stuff in this magazine. And I think what was neat about it, it was like getting 5 or 6 mini books from these authors every issue, which was very, very cool. Remember when I told you about Senenmut's tomb and that experience I had at it? Here is Hatshepsut's. It just happens to be in here. And that was part of this book we read. And I told you this story about this event there. That's Hatshepsut's tomb. Hatshepsut, the 18th dynasty pharaoh. That's Deir el-Bahri, and these are the Luxor Mountains. Right on the other side of this ridge, just if you could just hop over the top of that, you'd be in the Valley of the Kings. But over down here, which is off the picture, you see these ramps coming down here. They went into a roadway that went straight out. And down in the gully where these mountains came and they curved toward you here. And this is where Senenmut's tomb was. So when you're looking at this site, that's a great reminder of where I was when that experience took place, that vision down there at the tomb and so on. So this is, anyway, this is Intrepid magazine. Thinking of reviving this and still thinking about it. We'll see what happens. But that gives you an idea of what we had and what we were doing. And there's the John Ward interview, as a matter of fact. So there you go, folks. Just found that in a box today. Thought I'd let you know. That's stuff I'm thinking about doing. There he is, John Ward. That's a picture I took of him at Saqqara at the stepped pyramid of Dozier. So, blah, blah, blah. There it is, Intrepid. That was the ad for our Exodus Reality, which we'll be reading in the near future sometime. Now, next week, starting tomorrow night, actually, I'm going to be gone for a week to 8 days, 9 days. And so I won't be here unless I find opportunity to come on and do some broadcasts. I'm going to the wedding. On the way back, we're stopping to see my dad in Ohio. And then we're going to the Serpent Mounds, which are just a few miles from where he lives. And so I might do a broadcast from there. Unless we have inclement weather or something strange happens, I might do a little quick broadcast, and I'll announce it ahead of time, give you a little head start that I might come on live and walk you around that site, and we'll talk about it. But until then, thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed the book. Go ahead and go get the book if you'd like, and you can have a copy of that. I don't have any of these on hand. I have some of the Nephilim on hand. I have some of the Exodus on hand, but I don't have any of the Reptilian books on hand. So if you'd like them inscribed, you can send them to me. I'll send them back. And there you go. Thanks for being here. I will see you next time. During the trip, I'll see you. And then we'll get back into doing some regular broadcasts when I get back in about 10 days. So thanks for being here. Have a good night. See you soon.